And welcome back to Comment Commentary, the show where I respond to comments I get with commentary. I'm Hardleg Joe, if you didn't know, joined as always by Twitch chat, and I guess Critter's here too. And today's comment comes from Hylata05T, who wrote quite a lot in response to the last episode, and unlike some previous long comments that I've gotten before, I think we're actually going to go through most of this. You know, they've made several different points, and they seem to be trying to engage with me by actually responding to what I said. So we're going to go over all of this. That being said, I could take any one of these like 4 or 5 points and make a full 20-minute video out of that. And I don't want to spend an hour going over this. So instead, we're going to do something a little unique here. We're going to do like a sampler platter. I'm going to be responding to each of these briefly, and if any of those spark your interest, if you have some questions or some strong disagreements, you can leave them down in the comments to this video, and depending on what the reaction is, I'm sure one or more of these points will eventually become a full video. For now, though, let's go ahead and jump into this first segment, which reads, "The comparison of government to business, in that you pay money and receive stuff, lacks one crucial thing. In the case of business, you legally can opt out and the business will not be able to force you to pay and receive its services." So this is a sentiment that I see a lot on my channel. If you're unfamiliar with me and the kind of content I make here, a lot of it focuses on the idea of economic democracy. I believe that the economic forces in this country are so big, so impactful on your daily life, that they should be run democratically in the same way that the government is, that you should have a say in how those businesses are run. And this is a common response I get, this idea that, well, you can't opt out of the government, but no one's forcing you to buy anything. You don't have to buy from a company if you don't want to. Which is a strange combination of sentences, because it's half true, but probably not in the way you think. So, just for starters, right, you can opt out of the government if you want. If you don't want to pay taxes, you don't have to. You just also have to opt out of everything that the government provides. That means you can't use any government infrastructure, no driving on roads and bridges, no using the power lines, the water pipes, the sewer system that is either maintained by the government or at least heavily subsidized by it. It also means that you can't really make use of most businesses, most shops that sell things like food, because not only is food also heavily subsidized by the government to make it cheap enough so that you can afford it, but it's also regulated by the government to make sure that it's fairly safe, that you're not going to get like deathly ill by eating something. So there's a lot of stuff that the government provides, a lot more than I think most people realize. And if you want to opt out of all of that, you can. It just involves going off the grid. It essentially means leaving mainstream society behind, going out into the woods into some unincorporated territory, and building yourself a log cabin like the Unabomber. You know? Starting your own farm, hunting and trapping animals, being completely self-sufficient. But most people don't consider that a viable option because it's not practical. You know, they don't have the skills to be self-sufficient, and even if they did, they don't want to be. And the same thing is true of businesses, of capitalism in general. I mean, obviously not all private businesses are the same. If I don't want to buy a Funko Pop or the new Call of Duty, there's not really a huge incentive to do so. But I do need to buy food. I need to buy shelter, you know, like a house or an apartment. I need hygiene products like soap and toothpaste. I need clothing. I need medicine. There are a lot of essentials for life that are only really provided by private businesses. And yeah, you know, if I wanted to, I could start my own farm in my backyard and try to be self-sufficient. I could raise sheep, shear them, learn to sew so I could make my own clothing. I could make my own soap by wringing the fat from the pigs I slaughter in my backyard. But, doing all that is about as difficult as moving off the grid. So that's what I mean by it's half true. because only one half of the statement can be correct. You either have to admit that, yes, you can leave capitalism behind in the same way that you can leave the government behind, or you can recognize that both of those things are impractical for a modern person to abandon. That it's not easy to just pack up everything you know and live completely isolated from society. Alright, so that brings us to part 2 up here, which we're going to immediately ignore. This is the one part of their statement that I honestly don't really know what they're trying to say, so let's just skip that and move down to paragraph number 3 here. It says, also, businesses, when they are created, are owned by its creator, and they're in the right for gaining money from it, as they are the ones who puts their time, money, and dedication into it, and are taking the risk of it failing, which loses them all of those. If it wasn't true, there'd be no reason to create businesses at all. And since the creator owns the business, they can sell it or its parts to someone. So this is a bit weirdly phrased, but if I'm getting them correctly, what they're trying to say in the first half of this is, if you start a business and you're smart, you're hardworking, you create a product or a service that people like and it's successful, then you deserve some kind of reward, some kind of compensation for being such a hard worker. And I agree entirely. I'm not sure why they think I wouldn't agree with that statement, but it's something that I see on quite a few videos. There's people who seem to think that just because I want economic democracy, I also want everyone's paycheck to be the same. Which is not true at all. I just want businesses to be run democratically. And while it's possible that the people will elect to have everyone's paychecks the same, that doesn't seem likely. I think most people understand that some people work harder than others, some are more skilled than others, and they deserve to be rewarded for that. You know, life may not be fair, but in general, humans strive to make it fair as much as possible. So if you start a company and you build it from the ground up and you're a really good boss who's really successful, and then your company becomes democratized, I think all your employees will be able to recognize the hard work you put in. They'll say, yeah, he's a good leader, he deserves the leadership position, and that should come with more payment. So there's still going to be economic incentives to not only start a business, but to maintain it. The only thing that you're giving up is the ability to own that business. You can't then stop working and continue to make money off of it. You can't sell the business to someone else and let that new owner run it into the ground. Which brings me to the second part of this statement, this idea that needs to be rephrased a little bit, basically asking, if people can't own their businesses, then what reason would they have to start one? Which is like crazy, right? Like, are you really so capitalism brained that the only motivation you can think of to start a business is to own it? Because I can think of like dozens of motivations. This is one of those things I could make an entire 20-minute video on. So just to simplify things, just to give one example, let's take me. I have my own business. Specifically, I run a YouTube channel. Not this one. I have a much more popular one where I play Yu-Gi-Oh! And that pays all my bills. Do I own that channel? Not really. I mean, I can't sell shares of it. I'm not even sure if I could sell it to someone else. I'd really have to check the YouTube terms of service. Which is your big hint. YouTube owns my YouTube channel. I'm just allowed to operate it. They can, at any time, for any reason, decide to completely wipe my YouTube and all my videos from the face of the earth. I don't actually own anything involved with it. I just own some of the, like, intellectual property, the Hardleg logo or whatever. So, there's the question. Why would I create a YouTube channel if I can't own it 100% and do with it whatever I want? Because I still make money off of it? There's still benefits to operating a YouTube channel even though I don't get 100% possession of it? And not only that, but I also enjoy making YouTube videos. Like, I would make YouTube videos even if I wasn't getting paid for it all, even if there was no monetary incentive. And you have to look no further than this channel you're currently watching, which does not have monetization turned on, which I make zero money from, which I do just out of the passion of liking to create these videos. So there's two examples. I could give you plenty more, but needless to say, there's a lot of reasons to engage in work, to do business, beyond simply being able to own it and then sell it to whoever you want. So that brings us to point number 4 up here. I think it's number 4. It's the third one we're responding to. We're looking at this point, the part that's highlighted. And they start by quoting me in the previous video, where I say, I would like businesses to be controlled by the workers. And then they ask, who would create the businesses? I'll stop them right there. The workers would. The same people that are that are operating the businesses. They talk about, the government being the only other option for creating businesses, and it's like, no, just because you can't own a business doesn't mean you can't start a business. And this is where the example from last episode really shines once again. The idea of businesses being treated the same as towns. You don't need a government to start a town. Towns kind of grow up around settlements, around people building houses, building their own places to live, and just sort of naturally building infrastructure around that. The only time the government really steps in is once you reach a certain population. Then they come in and be like, okay, well, clearly you're a town now, which means you need to have democratic institutions. You need to have elections to vote for mayor, you need to have laws, you need to have some minimum infrastructure. At a certain point, the area you're living in becomes a town, and it's the same thing with democratic businesses. If you just want to start a small burger stand with you and a couple buddies, you can. The whole point of economic democracy is that once your business reaches a certain size, once it gets the power of like a small town where you have hundreds, maybe thousands of workers, then you have to have certain democratic tendencies. The people who work for you should get a say in how everything is being run. And if you started a business and you're a good boss who pays their workers well and provides a good service and your business is successful, there's no reason to think that your employees wouldn't elect you to be the CEO of that business. The only time you have to worry is if you're a shitty boss, if you exploit your workers and treat them poorly, and you're running the business badly. That's the thing about economic democracy. A lot of the people who oppose it will talk about the idea of being rewarded for merit. And a democratic system ensures that you have to maintain a level of hard work, that you have to be held accountable for your actions. It's a system that is more meritocratic? More merit-based than the current one we have, where an owner can give it to their son, and it doesn't matter how bad the son is or if the son even works. They own it and they can do whatever they want with it because it's their property. And the thousands of people who might work for that company are shit out of luck if they have anything to say. And that brings us to the last section here, which is also the longest section. And it reads, the problem with the American model of business-government relationships is the fact that your government is in cahoots with oligopolies and helps them to prevent any competitors from rising. This actually suppresses the free market and leads to a centralizing of wealth. If government supported newborn businesses instead of creating more and more policies that require time and money that only big corporations have, you Westerners would have it a lot better. So, the first half of this statement, I completely agree. The people who have the money, the capitalists at the top of the system, they sure are using the government to get laws passed to their benefit. If you wonder why the democracy doesn't feel like a democracy, it's because the people with money are lobbying the politicians to do things that are against your interest and in their interest. Where they kind of falter is the end part, the conclusion they draw from this, which is a little bit difficult because now we're going to talk about markets, about market economics, which is something that a lot of people conflate with capitalism. They think that capitalism is markets, but those are two separate ideas. You don't need to have capitalism to have markets. You can have a free market without people owning pieces of that market. Market economics, at its very most basic, is about the idea of competition. The way to get the best service is to have two different markets compete against each other, and in doing that, they will just naturally try to provide better services at lower cost to everyone. And that'll result in the best possible option for the consumers. It's supposed to be good for society as a whole that competition is happening. And I think most people kind of understand that, which is why they also understand the main problem we have right now is that it's almost impossible to compete, especially in certain industries, just because you have these giants that absolutely dominate the space. Your Amazons, your Microsofts, your McDonald's, your Walmart, Coca-Cola, Frito-Lay, these huge global industries that have so much money and so many resources that no startup could ever possibly stand against them. The best you can hope for in the modern day is that you create some new product, some new service, you get into a new niche, and you become successful enough that one of the giants will look down and be like, hey, we'll give you $10 million to buy your company off of you. And, that's really good for you who started the business, and usually really bad for everyone who works at the business, for all the consumers who actually buy that product, because now that product's being absorbed into a huge company that is going to run it into the ground, that is probably going to milk it for all it's worth, make the product worse, treat the employees worse. That's kind of why I'm against this whole idea of capitalism. It benefits very, very few people to the detriment of everyone else. And again, that's the best case scenario. Oftentimes what happens, especially if you refuse the first offer, is that big company will just steal your idea. They'll just do whatever you're doing, but because they have the means and the resources, they will do it at scale, they will do it cheaper than you, and they will just outcompete you by nature of their size alone. And the thing about that is that it's not the result of government intervention, like this person seems to think. Having these giant companies with a lot of wealth is the natural end result of competition. Because competitions have winners and losers. They are not an eternal cycle that can always be fought on fair ground. The nature of competition is that one company will defeat the other one, take more of a market share, and get bigger. Over time, they consolidate. They bring in more companies, they get more resources, it allows them to do better, and you inevitably end up with these huge monolithic companies that completely dominate an entire industry. We've been here once before, around the time of the Great Depression in America. You had 1% of the population owning 90% of the wealth and businesses, running almost everything. And it resulted in awful conditions for almost everyone. And it took the government coming in to break up those monopolies to try to put everything back into place. But as you can see, 100 years later, we're pretty much back to the same exact situation that we were before. The big companies now may not technically be monopolies, but people have found loopholes, they have found workarounds, because that's just naturally how the system works. A free market will tend towards consolidation. And you can break down those pieces as much as you want, you can try to incentivize smaller businesses all you want, but inevitably, you're just repeating that same cycle. They will build up and create bad conditions again, requiring you to come in and bust them up again. The solution is not to say that big companies are inherently bad, it's to say big companies have now become infrastructure that needs to be democratically managed. Amazon existing is not a problem. The problem is that it doesn't pay its workers enough, that it's really inefficient because a lot of its money is going to shareholders, that it's milking the customers dry at the expense of good products and services. And most of that can be either resolved or at least helped by making that a democratic company where the customers, or at the very least the laborers, are the ones who decide how the system is run. And yeah, I think that's about all I had to say on this comment. But you'll have to let me know if you like this sampler platter style situation where I'm talking about a bunch of different topics. And like I said at the beginning, if any of this sparked your interest, if you have questions or you violently disagree with what I said, leave it down in the comments. Take your time. Write the best comment you can. You know, there's no cutoff date or whatever. And I'll go through it. I'll pick one of the best ones. And maybe you can appear in the next commentary. For now, thank you again to Kylata05T. As always, I need to remind everyone that just because I disagree with this person does not mean we're enemies. It's very clear that we both want the same thing. We both want people to flourish. We both want the big corporations to have less power. We want a prosperous middle class where people are rewarded for their behavior. They just seem to have a lot of mistakes on how we achieve that goal. We're all on the same side here. We just need to realize it, and we need to collect around one specific idea. At least that's what I think. Again, comment in the comments or whatever. For now, though, I'm cutting it off. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good one. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, stay safe out there.